Hey team, I wanted to just share a little bit of the exploration I've been doing around trying to simplify the navigation between projects. As some of you may recall, we used to have something called the context switcher, which worked really well in projects, but not so well in other contexts. For this specific issue, we're not necessarily going to try to ease the change of going between projects from other contexts, um, but in some of the examples I'll walk through, they are a few ideas that potentially might consider. Um, if not this in this issue, maybe in the future. So the first one is a bit of a recall back to what I'll say is Old Faithful, meaning our old context switcher. Um, so I've shown all the different contexts just to help illustrate how things would change or not change. And I think it also gives a better feel for what it looks like when you move around to different places. So let's just say you're in a project. You could now see that the first page is the overview. I have not put project overview because we have project still in the context header. And it would function similar to how we used to have it function, where you could search, except I've changed it up a little bit where opening up a project only shows list of projects. So perhaps just your 5 frequently visited ones that we already compute, and then we can maybe also provide a list of the start projects below that. Could even consider maybe contributed as well, with a reference to get to all my projects. But if that doesn't suffice, then you could toggle over to groups if that's where you're trying to go. This gives us a way to not have to intermix projects with groups, but gives us a way to switch between them if that's what we're trying to do. The reason why I say we're not necessarily trying to ease navigating from the profile page to a project, but it would feel weird not to give the same type of treatment to a group. So from the group area, it would default to opening up to groups, but you could switch to projects and then pick up one of your projects from there. This feels like maybe the most boring solution from just a straight UI perspective, but I know that it brings a lot of complexity in terms of how does the search function work, extending our disclosure box here to function to do all things that were proposed. So that's one option that I was considering. But I've always kind of struggled with a bit of the compartmentalization of the two-toned navigation sidebar. So I was trying to play with the visuals a little bit and see if I can make it feel more unified. So in a similar way, I've basically color drenched the sidebar, and I've done a few things to try and reduce the amount of items in a single spot, move a few things around. So first, I'll just note with the group and projects, I really disliked the just overview line pinned section. This would be a much bigger change, but I would rather just be like the overview with the pinned items with their own icons, which would be its own undertaking. I certainly understand that. That was one aspect that I think helps make it feel less compartmentalized. Additionally, I was really struggling with how to tie in the user shortcuts. I don't know how well this would be received. I do like how clean it feels to just tuck them all under the user profile, which I'll kind of show an idea that I have around exposing them in there later. But one aspect that I think we could potentially go back to, I've increased the affordance around the context title. It's quite small right now, and I know we've seen some places people complaining about how small that text is. Even some people using a default font size that's bigger than that, so it's forcing it to grow anyway. So we might want to consider bumping that up just to make it more legible. I think it also helps break the sections up a little bit and give it a clearer hierarchy. Potentially could even help us better identify the difference between being in a group and project. I've also dropped the creation button to the bottom to add balance to the footer. And I've brought the admin area button above it as like a floating action button. And I've removed it from the admin area specifically. We aren't really addressing this right now, but where the admin area button is currently, when it's translated in French, it is long enough to overlap the help button, which isn't ideal. So this location right now for it probably can't be where it is forever. So that's why I call it the Context Switcher 2.0. It's more of a bigger overhaul, which would include like adding a bunch of new icons, having to redo all of the color variations for the sidebar itself, evaluating its accessibility standards against it, pushing for things that are potentially controversial, like moving the user shortcuts into the user profile. But I do like how this better like puts the collapse sidebar button on its own. I don't know why sometimes it shows the one I have with a caret, sometimes it doesn't. In the design, they're all there, but for some reason Figma's not rendering it. I've also fixed the search results context title. I don't know when it ended up in like the middle of it, but it should be at the top. Another idea that I was toying with, and so this kind of exemplifies the problem I was going with around where do I put these user shortcuts, but we used to just use a drop down for projects and groups in the top bar once upon a time. And as Mark had kind of said, it just made him feel at home to see those, just better understood what those would be doing. So I was playing with the idea of bringing those in. Again, as a drop down, projects just gives you projects, groups just gives you access to those frequently accessed groups. The challenge is like this starts to grow quite a bit, and it'll even look a little more chunky once the organization switcher has been turned on for everybody too. Again, this goes kind of beyond just improving projects and groups because it's in a universal location where everybody's going to see it and no matter what context they're in. To kind of like continue playing on that theme, I thought about trying to not add too many things up here by bringing them down here, but that means I have to move the help, which I've put up at the top, which again starts creating longer top bar buttons. I've also moved the admin area button up because I didn't have the affordance down here, and it felt a little weird to have the floating action button above these two buttons. So again, these would open up just those same boxes of drop downs to choose from. With this one, I wanted to try. I really want to try and communicate to users that like the goal is we want you to open into a project or open into a group. So I was playing with this idea of using a folder to communicate that open action. The problem being like just adding that folder here just creates like 3 buttons up top and then like 2/3 and 1/3 of a button. It just kind of felt weird visually to have them next to each other. So again, I've tucked them away, the user shortcuts under the user profile. It does feel a lot neater, but I don't think that many would love having to click twice, from GitLab at least, to get to their to-do list. So I don't anticipate that being super well received, but that was just how I was trying to deal with that visual clutter. And then not changing any functionality per se, but you could use the open action to jump straight to searching for projects. And we could then choose that this be the entry point for where we show the frequently visited projects and the frequently visited groups. And we could also consider adding some form of the starred projects just to give greater coverage. I know we've seen some people ask for the ability to also see starred projects here. To differentiate that, the search or go-to would just open up the different contexts in GitLab, as well as the quick filters that we've already had at the bottom. So it's essentially moving those projects to here and moving the or removing them from the default opening view. So to keep with that similar theme, I was also considering like, okay, what if we took those actions, like we took the create action out of the top, we move it into into the header, kind of differentiate the top a little bit with a create and a open action. Didn't feel quite as clean, and I've also tested a design similar to this once before, and it wasn't very clear what users would do to change projects. But maybe my former testing wasn't as conclusive. So then I'm like, okay, what if we just drop the icon only and we use a more explicit button? Might be okay. Just felt quite chunky, I guess, just to put it in simple terms. Just to have all these buttons all appear together. Just a lot going on. So with this one, I tried to go for a more creative, just a less in-your-face option by taking the create button down, bring it to the bottom, making this footer a little more functional. I've just been playing with different styles for the help, and I've used like a little life raft here to represent like the support or help, a folder for opening, and then even differentiating the start projects from opening up other things. I think that could be a unique, like kind of toolbar. Again, having to pull out the admin area from that spot. I just hate that this leaves the collapse sidebar button just kind of awkwardly floating up there with the user profile. But that's kind of where it's at the moment. So then I was like, okay, well, what if we didn't even touch anything related to groups or projects, but we redid the homepage? I've always been kind of considering like consolidating in some way all of those dashboards that users can choose for their home page. It's just one single page that you can toggle between them. What I like about this is we remove the duplication of like the issues, merge requests, and to-do list counters, and we may not need users to completely rely on just using the projects as their default homepage, because we could offer them options in the sidebar itself for navigating somewhere else. So maybe they would use something different as opposed to always relying on projects because that's the only way they know how to get there. Another kind of universal idea that didn't feel like reasonable just to keep on a group or project page, but adding starred projects into the footer. So changing the admin area button from a small default button to just a tertiary one. There is enough affordance, I think, to fit 5, and conveniently, I think on average, users star about 5 projects from the last time I checked. I happen to have 16 starred, so we'd have to provide some sort of mechanism to either select 5 or just pick 5 of the most visited ones that users have. So these are getting a little more beyond what we have today, but I just wanted to play with them because they were a part of my 50 for 50 exploration on navigation sidebar concepts. I've always liked the idea of pulling projects and groups into the rail of the navigation. The thing that I'm even noticing here is I'm kind of like delineating frequently used projects from starred projects from frequently visited groups. But when I'm thinking about my own GitLab account, like I'm in way more than this. Like I've got 16 starred projects. I've definitely got at least 7 that I probably frequently visit, and then at least 2 groups. So this wouldn't even be comprehensive to cover all things that I have. And just seeing it all together, it just feels super heavy to see all this stuff. And I also don't love how like close the icons for issues, merge requests, and like the to-do list fit right next to the ones in the sidebar in your work. Feels a little inelegant. it seems okay here, but still, again, I think we run into the issue of like, what's the difference between issues here and issues here? Just something that's always kind of been a bit weird. But it's what's nice about this is it kind of gives us a place to eventually put the organization switcher, but it feels a little odd without it. Kind of continuing on that, I just want to see, like, is there a way I could maybe reduce the number of items in there, just to make it feel a little less overwhelming, a little bit easier to remember what the items are and how many there are there. So this harkens back a little bit to one of those earlier designs where I was showing you around the opening concept, like dividing the search and open concept. So I've put those in here. So I think that would be a little bit of a controversial change with search. I know they've wanted to have more of a prominent UI placement. I don't even know if this is enough, but it feels more like, okay, I have functions that I can use. I can search for something I'm looking for. I can open a group or project that I need. I could use potentially even like triggering Duo chat from here, or I can create something. And then I was even trying to play with the user shortcut options that we have. I was trying to avoid reusing the same icons because you can see they're really close to each other. So I was playing with the idea of like, maybe we can have like an icon for just the assignments and something specific for code review, and then something TBD for notifications. But this felt less heavy to me, um, as well as drawing up the context to the top made it feel more like a specific place as opposed to two sections. So I like the consistency that the sidebar rail could bring, but it does feel a little funky to try and figure out how to make it work with the rest of the content that we have on the different contexts. So that's where I've gotten to so far. Let me know if any of these stood out to you.